The great Crystal Hall station Primark had never been so full. And it had never been so quiet at the same time, which made Ambassador Yeltris nervous as he slithered toward the central podium with his data. Crystal clutched tightly in his tendrils for 3,000 cycles. The Galactic Assembly had operated without calling an emergency session, and now here they were. All 847 species packed into a chamber designed for peaceful debates about trade routes and mining rights. And every single one of them was terrified. Yeltris could smell the fear in the air. A thick chemical soup of stress hormones from dozens of different biologies. And it made his scales itch in ways that reminded him of his larval days when predators would circle his spawning pool. He reached the podium and activated the display system, watching as holographic images bloomed into existence above the gathered delegates. And he heard the gasps, the clicks, the whistles, and the screams that followed. The Vorthax swarm filled the display like a disease spreading across healthy tissue. "Fellow delegates," Yeltris began, his translator converting his chemical speech into 1,000 different languages. "What you see before you is sensor data collected from the edge of civilized space just 40 rotations ago. And I wish I could tell you that our sensors malfunctioned. But they did not." The swarm stretched across the hologram like an endless ocean of black shapes. Each one a living ship filled with billions of hungry organisms that existed only to consume and reproduce and consume again. Ambassador Threll of the Mallory Communion rose from her seat, her delicate wings trembling so hard that she could barely stay airborne. And her voice came out as a broken song of pure terror. "How many?" she asked, though it was clear she did not truly want the answer. "Trillions," Yeltris replied. And the word hung in the air like a death sentence. "Perhaps quadrillions. We cannot count them all. And it does not matter because even a fraction of their number is enough to consume every world in our galaxy." The assembly erupted into chaos, the Threnix delegation. Those cold, logical beings who never showed emotion began speaking rapidly among themselves in voices that trembled for the first time in recorded history. And Yeltris heard them discussing surrender protocols and preservation of genetic samples. The ancient Celestins, those vast energy beings who had watched galaxies form and die, began humming their death songs, haunting melodies that they only sang when they accepted that existence itself was ending. "We must fight," roared General Kreth of the Valorian Empire, slamming his armored fist against his console. "We have the greatest fleet in the galaxy, and we will meet these creatures in battle." "Your fleet numbers 10,000 ships," Yeltris said quietly. "The swarm has consumed 17 galaxies, and each galaxy had fleets far larger than yours, and now those fleets are gone, digested. Turn into more swarm." General Kreth sat down slowly, and for the first time in his long military career, he had nothing to say in the back of the chamber, seated in the modest section reserved for newer member species. The human delegation watched all of this unfold with expressions that the other species could not quite read. Ambassador Sarah Chun sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes moving from speaker to speaker as if she was memorizing everything that was said. Humans had joined the assembly only 200 years ago, a blink of an eye in galactic terms, and they had spent most of that time asking questions and learning, and trading for technology that their primitive civilization desperately needed. They were considered harmless, even endearing in their enthusiasm, like children who had just discovered that the universe was much bigger than their small blue planet when the debate raged on for hours without any solution. Ambassador Chun leaned over to her aide, Commander Jackson, and whispered something that made his face go pale. "Are you certain?" He whispered back, and Chun simply nodded once Jackson pulled out a communication device and spoke into it quietly. And then his expression changed from pale to something that looked almost like grim determination. "Ma'am," he said, "Earth confirms. Grey Dawn is active. All assets are being recalled. Ambassador Chun closed her eyes for just a moment. And when she opened them again, something in her gaze had shifted, becoming harder and colder and somehow older than her. 43 years she stood up. The movement was so sudden that several nearby delegates turned to look at her, curious about what the young human ambassador might want to say, perhaps expecting some naive speech about hope or cooperation instead. Chun signaled to her entire delegation with a sharp gesture that meant only one thing in human body language: they needed to leave immediately. The other humans rose as one. 15 diplomats and aides and security personnel moving with a coordination that seemed almost military. And they began walking toward the exit. Ambassador Chun called out Yeltris from the podium. "Where are you going?" "We have not dismissed the session. There is still much to discuss." Chun did not answer, and she did not slow down. And then something happened that made every species in the chamber freeze in absolute shock. The humans started running, not walking quickly, not hurrying with dignity, but actually running at full speed toward the doors as if something terrible was chasing them, their feet pounding against the crystal floor in a rhythm that echoed through the suddenly silent chamber. Ambassador Yeltris felt his heart stop beating for a moment as he watched the human delegation disappear through the doors. And then he felt something he had not felt since he was a tiny larva hiding from predators. He felt abandoned. "They are leaving us," whispered the Mallory ambassador, her song broken and filled with despair. "The humans are abandoning us to die." General Kreth laughed bitterly, though there was no humor in the sound. "What did you expect from such a young species? They do not have the courage to face extinction with dignity. They would rather run and hide like prey animals." Elder Dex of the Celestins stopped his death song long enough to observe. "Perhaps they know something we do not, or perhaps they simply wish to spend their final days on their homeworld, surrounded by their families." "Cowards," spat the Threnix delegate. Though his voice still trembled, "We welcomed them into our community. We shared our knowledge with them, and this is how they repay us." By fleeing at the first sign of real danger. Yeltris said nothing, but he could not stop staring at the empty seats where the humans had been sitting just moments ago, and he could not shake the feeling that something very important had just happened, something that he did not understand. The assembly continued its debates for many more hours, but nothing was decided, and no solutions were found by the time the session ended. Every species had accepted that the swarm would arrive in 40 rotations, and that there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The galaxy had given up, but across the stars, in ships and stations and colonies scattered throughout civilized space, something very different was happening. Every human who heard the words "Grey Dawn" immediately stopped whatever they were doing. Freighter captains abandoned cargo worth billions of credits, simply walking away from their ships and booking passage to Earth. Scientists in the middle of groundbreaking experiments saved their data and shut down their laboratories without a word of explanation to their confused alien colleagues. Soldiers broke formation and headed for the nearest transport hub, ignoring the angry shouts of their commanding officers from other species. Diplomats ended conversations mid-sentence and began packing their belongings with hands that shook, not from fear, but from something else. Entirely something that looked almost like anticipation. On a small mining station at the edge of human space, a young engineer named Marcus looked up from his console when the Grey Dawn alert came through, and he smiled in a way that made his alien coworkers very uncomfortable. "What does this mean?" asked his Corvani supervisor, watching as Marcus began shutting down critical systems. "What is Grey Dawn? Where are you going?" Marcus paused for just a moment, looking at the alien who had been his boss and his friend for the past 3 years, and he felt a strange mix of emotions that he could not quite name. "Go home," Marcus said quietly. Spend time with your family. Tell them you love them. Why? The Kovani asked. His tendrils curling with confusion. Marcus was already walking toward the door. But he looked back one final time and said something that would haunt the Kovani for the rest of his life. Because we are going to save you. And we might not all come back. Then he was gone, leaving his supervisors standing alone in the suddenly empty control room, wondering what in all the stars the humans were planning, and somewhere in the vast darkness between galaxies, the Vorthak swarm continued its endless march toward the light of civilization, completely unaware that for the first time in 17 galaxies, something was preparing to fight back. The news spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel, carried by quantum communication networks that connected every civilized world. And the message was simple and devastating. The humans had abandoned them on 1,000 different planets. Species who had never agreed on anything suddenly found themselves united in a single emotion. And that emotion was despair. The humans were running. Then there truly was no hope. Ambassador Yeltris sat in his private quarters on Station Primarch. His tendrils wrapped around a glass of fermented nectar that he had been nursing for hours. And he could not stop thinking about the look on Ambassador Chun's face. Before she had run, he had known Sarah Chun for 15 years, had shared meals with her and debated policy with her, and even attended the naming ceremony for her second child. And in all that time, he had never seen her show fear. But today, when that message came through on her communicator, something in her expression had changed completely. The more Yeltris thought about it, the more he realized that what he had seen was not fear at all. But he could not figure out what it actually was. His communication console beeped, and he saw that it was a message from Elder Thex of the Celestins. Those ancient beings who had existed since before most species had evolved. Ambassador Yeltris, the message read. I have been studying the human exodus, and I have noticed something strange that I think you should see. Please come to my observatory at your earliest convenience. Yeltris finished his drink and made his way through the winding corridors of Station Primarch to the Celestine Observatory. A vast chamber filled with sensors and displays that showed every corner of the galaxy. Elder Thex floated in the center of the room, his energy form pulsing with colors that Yeltris had learned to recognize as deep concern. Watch, Thex said simply, and the displays around them came to life. Yeltris saw human ships, hundreds of them, all moving in the same direction, all heading toward the Sol system where Earth orbited its small yellow star. They are going home, Yeltris said sadly. Just as we expected. Keep watching, Thex replied. The display zoomed in on the Sol system, and Yeltris saw something that made his heart stop beating for the second time in 2 days. The orbital shipyards around Earth were activating. Not the small commercial facilities that built freighters and passenger liners, but massive structures hidden in the asteroid belt and behind the moons of the outer planets. Structures that Yeltris had never known existed. Those shipyards are enormous, Yeltris whispered, his tendrils going limp with shock. They must be decades old, perhaps centuries. How did we never detect them? Because the humans did not want us to detect them, Thex answered. They have been hiding these facilities since before they joined the assembly, building in secret while they smiled and asked us innocent questions about our technology. The display showed more details, and Yeltris felt his confusion growing into something that might have been fear. Ships were emerging from those hidden shipyards. Ships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Massive vessels bristling with weapons that glowed with energies that should not exist. What are those? Yeltris asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. I have analyzed their energy signatures, Thex said slowly, and I recognize some of them, but that is impossible, because those weapons were banned by the Galactic Assembly over 10,000 years ago. Yeltris stared at the display, watching as more and more ships emerged from hiding, and he began to understand something terrible. They lied to us, he said. his voice barely a whisper. All this time, they pretended to be primitive and harmless, but they were building weapons of mass destruction right under our noses. Not just weapons, Dex replied. Look at the shield configurations on those ships. Do they look familiar? Yeltris looked more closely, and his horror deepened when he recognized the energy patterns. Those are Kavani shields, he said, but improved somehow. More powerful than anything we have ever built. And the propulsion systems are based on Threnix designs, Dex continued. And the sensor arrays use Celestin technology. And the hull plating incorporates Valorian alloys. The ancient being's energy form pulsed with a color Yeltris had never seen before. Something between amazement and genuine fear. The humans have been studying us, Dex said quietly. Learning from every species in the assembly, taking the best of our technologies and combining them into something new, something that we never imagined possible. Yeltris felt sick, and he slithered backward until he bumped into a console, needing something solid to hold on to. But why? He asked. Why would they do this? Why would they pretend to be weak while building such terrible weapons in secret? Dex was silent for a long moment, his energy form flickering as he considered the question, and when he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of understanding. Do you remember when the humans first joined the assembly? The Yeltris nodded slowly, remembering those early days when the strange bipedal creatures had seemed so excited to meet other intelligent species, so eager to learn and share and explore. They asked many questions, Dex continued, about our technologies and our histories and our cultures. But there was one topic they returned to again and again. The Vorthax swarm, Yeltris whispered. Suddenly understanding. Yes, Dex confirmed. They wanted to know everything about the swarm. How it moved, how it consumed, how it reproduced. And when we told them that the swarm was inevitable and unstoppable, do you remember what they said? Yeltris searched his memory, trying to recall those ancient conversations. And then the words came back to him with terrible clarity. A young human diplomat, barely more than a child by galactic standards, had listened to the stories of 17 consumed galaxies with an expression that the other species had misread as naive optimism. There must be a way to stop them, the human had said. Every problem has a solution, we just have to find it. The assembled delegates had laughed gently, explaining that some things were beyond the power of any species to change. And the human had simply nodded and smiled and never asked about the swarm again. But now Yeltris understood what that smile had really meant. Humans had not accepted the inevitability of the swarm. They had simply stopped asking questions and started working on their own solution. 200 years, Yeltris said slowly. They've been preparing for this moment for 200 years. Perhaps longer, Dex replied. I have searched our records, and I found something interesting. The humans requested samples of swarm biomatter from the Archive of Extinction shortly after they joined the assembly. That request was denied, Yeltris said. I remember the debate. We decided that such research was too dangerous and too painful to pursue, and the humans accepted our decision graciously, Dex said. But I now believe they found other ways to obtain what they needed, because the weapons I see emerging from their shipyards are specifically designed to destroy organic matter at the cellular level. Yeltris felt the room spinning around him as the full weight of this revelation settled onto his shoulders. The Vulus felt the room spinning around him as the full weight of this revelation as the moment to his shoulders. The veil to his shoulders. The veil. Humans had not abandoned the galaxy. They had gone home to prepare for war. Should we tell the others? He asked, his voice shaking. Thex's energy form pulsed thoughtfully for a long moment before he answered. I think we should wait and see what the humans do next, because I am beginning to suspect that we have made a terrible mistake. What mistake? We treated them like children, Dex said quietly. We patted them on the head and told them that the universe was too big and too dangerous for them to change. And we never stopped to consider what happens when you tell humans that something is impossible. Yeltris remembered all the stories he had heard about human history. The wars and the plagues and the disasters that should have destroyed them 100 times over. And how they had survived every single one through sheer stubborn refusal to die. They do not accept defeat. Yeltris said slowly. No, Dex agreed. They do not, and I think the Vortex Swarm is about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible on the displays around them. The human fleet continued to grow, ship after ship emerging from hiding, each one a monument to 2 centuries of secret preparation, and somewhere in the vastness of space. The swarm drew closer, completely unaware that for the first time in its ancient existence, it was swimming towards something that was not prey. It was swimming toward a predator. In the deepest archives of the Celestine homeworld, where records older than most stars were kept in crystalline matrices that could survive the death of suns, Elder Dex searched for answers that he should have sought centuries ago. The truth about humanity had been hiding in plain sight, all along, scattered across thousands of small observations that no one had ever thought to connect. And now Dex felt like a fool for missing what should have been obvious. He pulled up the first human contact records. Those ancient files from when a primitive species on a small blue planet had sent radio signals into the darkness and waited with hopeful hearts for a reply. The Kovani had been the first to respond, as they always were with new species, and their initial assessment of humanity had set the tone for every interaction that followed. Promising but primitive, the Kovani report had stated. Social creatures with strong pack-bonding instincts, prone to emotional decision-making, unlikely to achieve galactic significance for at least 10,000 years. Dex read those words now and marveled at how wrong they had been. The humans had achieved faster-than-light travel within 50 years of first contact, had established colonies on a dozen worlds within a century, and had integrated themselves into galactic society with a speed that should have alarmed everyone. But instead of seeing a warning sign, the Assembly had seen only an eager young species trying desperately to catch up with their elder Dex pulled up another file. This one from the Valorian military archives. And what he found made his energy form flicker with emotions he had not felt in millennia. The Valorians had conducted a secret assessment of human military capabilities approximately 150 years ago, and their findings had been classified at the highest level. Human combat psychology differs fundamentally from all known species, the report stated. They do not fight to survive, they fight to win. And they do not recognize the difference between acceptable losses and total victory. The Valorian analysts had watched recordings of human wars. Those bloody conflicts that had nearly destroyed their civilization multiple times before they reached the stars. And they had come away deeply disturbed. These creatures will sacrifice themselves without hesitation if they believe their death will benefit their community. One analyst had written, "This is not rational behavior by any standard we understand, and it makes them extremely dangerous in combat situations." The report had recommended that the Assembly monitor human military development carefully and intervene if they showed signs of building weapons capable of threatening galactic peace, but somehow that recommendation had been lost in bureaucratic systems, filed away and forgotten while the humans smiled and asked innocent questions about shield harmonics and propulsion theoretics. Moved to the next file. This one from the scientific archives, and he found records of human researchers working alongside alien scientists on projects throughout the galaxy. At first glance, the humans appeared to be eager students, always asking questions and taking notes and expressing gratitude for the knowledge being shared with them. But Dex noticed a pattern that no one had seen before. Every research project that humans participated in eventually produced breakthroughs that benefited The humans far more than anyone else. Small improvements to existing technologies that seemed harmless on their own, but that added up to something much larger when combined a human scientist working on SHIELD technology here, another working on weapon systems there, a third studying alien biology in a remote laboratory, all of them reporting back to Earth with pieces of a puzzle that only humanity could see. They had been stealing from the galaxy for 200 years, not through force or deception, but through patient observation and careful learning. And no one had noticed because no one had thought to look. Thex felt a strange mixture of horror and admiration as he considered what humanity had accomplished. They had walked into a room full of ancient and powerful civilizations, had convinced everyone that they were harmless children, and had quietly taken everything they needed to build the greatest military force in galactic history, and they had done it all while smiling and nodding and saying please and thank you. Archive doors opened, and Ambassador Yeltris slithered in, his scales pale with stress and his tendrils trembling with exhaustion. "I have been trying to contact Earth for 3 days," he said. "All I receive are automated messages saying that the human government is unavailable. They are busy," Dex replied. "Very busy indeed." He showed Yeltris what he had found in the archives. Watching as the Corvani ambassador's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something that looked almost like respect. "They played us," Yeltris said finally. "From the very beginning, they knew exactly what they wanted and exactly how to get it. I found something else," Dex said, pulling up one final file. "This is from the Archive of Extinction, the records we keep of civilizations that the swarm has consumed." The file contained biological data from 17 different galaxies, detailed analyses of the swarm's structure and behavior and weaknesses, gathered by doomed civilizations in their final days and transmitted across the void as a warning to others. This data was supposed to be restricted, Yeltris said. "Access requires approval from the full assembly." "Someone accessed it anyway," Dex replied. "Approximately 170 years ago, using credentials that should not have existed." He displayed the access log, and both of them stared at the name recorded there. Dr. Sarah Chun, grandmother of the current ambassador Chun, had somehow obtained clearance to view the complete swarm archives just 2 decades after humanity joined the assembly. She had spent 3 months studying the data, downloading everything she could find about the swarm's biology and behavior and the failed attempts to stop it. And then she had logged out and never accessed the archive again. 3 months, Yeltris whispered. "She spent 3 months learning everything we knew about the swarm. And then she went home and started the Grey Dawn program," Dex concluded. "I found references to it in intercepted human communications. A secret project to develop weapons specifically designed to destroy the swarm. 170 years, Yeltris said slowly. "They have been preparing for this war longer than most human beings live." Dex nodded, his energy form pulsing with the weight of this revelation. "They knew the swarm would come eventually," he said. "They knew that the galaxy had given up on fighting it. And they decided that if no one else was going to prepare for the inevitable, they would do it themselves. But why keep it secret?" Yeltris asked. "Why not share their plans with the assembly? Why not ask for help?" Dex considered the question carefully before answering. "Because we would have stopped them," he said finally. "The weapons they are building are banned for good reason. They cause devastation on a scale that most species cannot imagine. And if the assembly had known what the humans were doing, we would have intervened. So they hid their preparations behind a mask of innocence," Yeltris said, "pretending to be primitive and harmless while building an arsenal capable of destroying a threat that has consumed 17 galaxies. They did what they believed was necessary," Dex replied. "And looking at the alternative, I am not certain they were wrong." The two beings sat in silence for a long moment. surrounded by the accumulated knowledge of countless civilizations. And they both thought about what it meant that humanity had chosen to bear this burden alone. They had not asked for help or permission. They had not complained about the unfairness of being forced to prepare for a war that might never come. They had simply done what needed to be done, and now, with the swarm 40 rotations away from the first populated world, humanity was finally revealing what they had built. Do you think they can actually stop it? Yeltris asked Quietlife. Thex thought about everything he had learned, about the weapons and the ships and the centuries of careful preparation, and about the strange stubborn creatures who refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. I do not know, he admitted. But I do know that the swarm has never faced anything like humanity before. And I suspect that the next few weeks will be very interesting indeed. On Earth, 9 billion humans looked up at a sky filled with warships and felt something that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten how to feel. They felt hope, they felt ready. Admiral James Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched the stars disappear. Vorthak's swarm had arrived at the edge of the Mallory system, and now the endless blackness of space was being replaced by something far darker. A living tide of hunger that blotted out the light of distant suns around him. His crew worked in focused silence, their hands moving across consoles with the precision of soldiers who had trained for this moment their entire lives. All ships report ready, Commander Rodriguez said from her station. 12,000 vessels standing by for your orders, Admiral. Okonkwo nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the tactical display where the swarm appeared as an ocean of red dots spreading across the screen like blood in water. 12,000 ships against trillions of enemy organisms. And somehow they needed to win, open a channel to the fleet, he said. And his voice was calm and steady despite the fear that coiled in his chest. Like a living thing, the communications officer nodded. And suddenly Okonkwo's words were being broadcast to every human ship in the fleet, to every crew member who had volunteered for this mission, knowing that they might not survive. This is Admiral Okonkwo, he began. In approximately 30 minutes, we will engage the Vorthak swarm in combat. And I want you all to understand something before we begin. He paused, gathering his thoughts, knowing that these might be the last words many of his people would ever hear. For 200 years, the galaxy has told us that the swarm cannot be stopped, he continued. They told us that 17 galaxies have fallen, that resistance is futile, that the only rational response is acceptance of inevitable destruction. The crew on the bridge had stopped working to listen, their eyes fixed on their admiral with an intensity that made his heart swell with pride. They called us primitive and naive for refusing to believe that, Okonkwo said. They laughed when we asked questions about weaknesses in swarm biology. They pitied us when we expressed hope that something could be done. He let those words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. But we are human, and humans do not accept the inevitable. We do not surrender to despair. We do not lie down and wait to die. We fight, we struggle. We rage against the darkness with every breath in our bodies and every beat of our hearts. Commander Rodriguez wiped tears from her eyes, but her voice was steady when she reported that all ships were standing by and awaiting orders. Today we prove them wrong. Okonkwo finished. Today we show the galaxy what happens when you tell humans that something is impossible. Today we fight not just for ourselves, but for every species that has given up hope. Today we remind the universe why humanity will never, ever stop reaching for the stars. He paused one final time, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper that somehow carried across the entire fleet. Gray dawn. This is your admiral speaking. Weapons hot. All ships advance. And may whatever gods you believe in watch over us all. The human expeditionary fleet surged forward into the darkness. The first engagement happened within seconds. swarm organisms throwing themselves at the human ships in endless waves. Their acid-coated tendrils scraping against shields that had been designed specifically to resist their touch. The Defiant shuddered as 1,000 impacts hit her shields simultaneously. But the barriers held, glowing with captured Carvani energy as they deflected attacks that would have destroyed any other ship in the galaxy. Forward batteries. Fire at will. Okonkwo commanded, the ship's main weapons activated, and beams of pure nuclear fire lanced out into the swarm, vaporizing everything they touched. But for every organism destroyed, 10 more took its place. And Okonkwo knew that conventional weapons would never be enough. Deploy the Reaper drones. He ordered. Commander Rodriguez hesitated for just a moment, knowing what those drones would do, but then she nodded and gave the command. Small vessels launched from the fleet's carrier ships, each one carrying a payload that had been specifically designed to exploit the swarm's greatest weakness. The Vorthax were not truly individual organisms. They were extensions of a vast hive mind that coordinated their actions through biological quantum networks. And the Reaper drones carried viruses engineered to attack those networks directly. First wave of drones reached the swarm and detonated, releasing clouds of microscopic machines that burrowed into the nearest organisms and began replicating within minutes. Entire sections of the swarm began moving erratically. Their coordination shattered as the virus disrupted their connection to the hive mind. "It is working," Rodriguez said, her voice filled with wonder. "Admiral, the bioweapons are actually working." But the swarm was ancient and adaptable, and it did not take long for it to respond. New organisms appeared at the front lines, larger and more heavily armored than the others, and they seemed immune to the viral attacks. "They are evolving," the science officer reported, "adapting to our weapons in real time. We need to hit them with something they cannot adapt to." Okonkwo had known this moment would come, had prepared for it during countless sleepless nights, and now he gave the order that would either save the galaxy or doom them all. "Signal the Prometheus wing," he said quietly. "Tell them it is time." Deep in the heart of the fleet, 50 ships that looked different from the others began moving forward, each one crewed by volunteers who had known from the beginning that they would not be coming home. The Prometheus vessels carried humanity's ultimate weapon, devices so terrible that their very existence was a crime against galactic law. And their crews had accepted this burden with full knowledge of what it meant. Captain Maria Santos sat in the command chair of the lead Prometheus ship, her hand hovering over a button that would trigger the most destructive force humanity had ever created. "Prometheus wing. This is Santos," she said. "We all knew this day might come. We all made our choice. I am proud to have served with you." Her crew responded with words of love and determination, speaking to families they would never see again. And then they fell silent as the moment arrived. "For Earth," Santos whispered. "For humanity. For everyone who ever looked up at the stars and refused to believe that they were meant to die." She pressed a button. The Prometheus vessels accelerated to maximum speed and drove directly into the heart of the swarm, their shields burning out one by one as millions of organisms tried to stop them. When the first ship exploded, it released a weapon that had no name, only a designation: Ray Dawn Primary. The explosion was not nuclear, it was something far worse. A cascade reaction that targeted organic matter at the molecular level and spread. Like a plague through everything it touched. The swarm died in waves, organisms dissolving into ash as the reaction raced through their interconnected bodies. And the hive mind screamed in frequencies that only the most sensitive instruments could detect. 39 more Prometheus vessels followed, each one adding to the cascade. And within hours, the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known was being torn apart from the inside. But the battle was not without cost. Human ships fell by the hundreds. their shields overwhelmed by desperate swarm counterattacks. And each destroyed vessel meant dozens or hundreds of lives. Lost Admiral Okonkwo watched the casualty reports scroll across his screen, each name a person he had sent to die, and he felt the weight of command pressing down on his shoulders like a physical force. "Admiral," Rodriguez said quietly, "the swarm is breaking. Their coordination is completely gone. They are fleeing in every direction." Okonkwo looked at the tactical display and saw that she was right. The ocean of red dots that had seemed endless just hours ago was now scattered and disorganized. Individual organisms fleeing blindly without the hive mind to guide them. "All ships," he commanded, "pursue and destroy. Do not let any of them escape. We end this today." The human expeditionary fleet spread out across the system, hunting down every last trace of the swarm with the relentless determination that had defined humanity since the first human ancestor had refused to be prey by the time the last organism was destroyed. 6 days had passed, and 4,000 human ships floated in the debris field as monuments to the cost of victory. 2 million human beings had given their lives to save a galaxy that had laughed at them, but they had won against impossible odds and ancient horrors and the weight of 17 fallen galaxies. Humanity had done what everyone said could not be done. They had killed the swarm, and somewhere on 100 different worlds, species who had given up hope looked up at the stars and began to understand that the universe was not as hopeless as they had believed, because if humans could do this, then maybe, just maybe, anything was possible. The Galactic Assembly had never been so quiet. 847 species filled the crystal amphitheater of Station Primarch, the same chamber where humanity had run from their seats just weeks ago. And now they sat in stunned silence as Ambassador Sarah Chun walked toward the podium. She looked different than the last time she had stood before them, older somehow despite the short time that had passed. And there was a weight in her eyes that had not been there before behind her. The seats reserved for the human delegation remained empty except for a single aide, a young man whose arm was in a sling and whose face bore the scars of recent battle. The rest of the human diplomatic corps had not survived. Chun reached the podium and stood in silence for a long moment, a gaze moving across the assembled species, taking in their expressions of awe and fear and something that looked almost like shame. 2,347,812, she finally said, her voice steady despite the grief that lurked beneath every word. The assembly waited, not understanding the significance of the number. "That is how many humans died in the Grey Dawn operation," Chun continued. "Soldiers and scientists and volunteers who knew they would not survive, who chose to give their lives so that others might live." Ambassador Yeltris shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his tendrils curling with emotions he could not name. They were mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, friends and lovers, and every single one of them went to their death willingly because they believed that some things are worth dying for. Chun's voice cracked slightly on the last words, but she collected herself and continued. "You asked us once why humans form attachments so easily, why we bond with other species, why we feel such deep connections to beings who are so different from ourselves." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was stronger. "You thought it was a weakness, a primitive survival mechanism that we would outgrow as we became more civilized. And you pitied us for our emotional nature." General Kreth of the Valorian Empire lowered his eyes, remembering the mocking words he had spoken about human cowardice when they had fled the assembly. "You were wrong," Chun said simply. "Our capacity for love is not a weakness. It is the source of our greatest strength. It is why we will burn ourselves to ash to protect what we love. It is why 2 million humans volunteered to die fighting a threat that was not even aimed at our homeworld." She let those words sink in before continuing. The swarm was coming for your worlds first. Not ours. We could have stayed home and waited. We could have built defenses around our own systems and hoped that the swarm would be satisfied with consuming the rest of the galaxy. The Mallory ambassador began to weep, her wings trembling as she remembered the terror of those final days when her people had been preparing for extinction. But we did not do that, Chum said, because in 200 years of living among you, we came to care about you. We formed bonds with your people and your cultures and your children. And when we learned that you were going to die, we could not accept it. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small data crystal, placing it on the podium. This contains complete schematics for every weapon and technology we use to destroy the swarm. Shield designs, propulsion systems, the Grey Dawn bioweapons. Everything. A ripple of shock passed through the assembly. We are giving you these freely, Chung continued, with no conditions and no demands for payment, because we want you to be safe. We want you to be able to defend yourselves if something like the swarm ever threatens you again. Ambassador Yeltris rose slowly from his seat, his voice trembling as he spoke. Ambassador Chun, we do not know what to say. We misjudged your species terribly. We called you cowards when you ran from this chamber. And we are ashamed. Chun smiled, but there was no mockery in the expression. Only a profound weariness. You did not understand why we ran, she said, and we did not have time to explain. But I want you to understand something now. She turned to face the entire assembly, her gaze sweeping across species that have been spacefaring when humanity was still learning to use fire. We did not run because we were afraid. We ran because every second counted. We had been preparing for the swarm for 200 years, building weapons and ships and training soldiers in secret. And when we received confirmation that the swarm had arrived, we knew that we had to mobilize immediately or everything would be lost. Elder Dex of the Celestin spoke, his ancient voice carrying across the chamber. You kept these preparations secret from us for 2 centuries. You deceived us about your true capabilities. Some might consider that a betrayal of trust. Chun nodded, accepting the criticism. You are right. And I will not pretend that what we did was entirely honest. But I want you to consider something. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. When our ancestors first joined the assembly, they asked about the swarm, and they were told that resistance was impossible. That acceptance of extinction was the only rational response. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably, remembering those ancient conversations. If we had told you what we were doing, you would have stopped us. You would have confiscated our weapons and dismantled our shipyards and lectured us about accepting the inevitable. And then the swarm would have come and killed everyone. The chamber fell silent as the truth of her words settled over them. We lied to you because we had no choice. Chung continued, because the galaxy had given up and someone had to carry the burden of hope. The Thranx delegate, those cold logical beings who rarely showed emotion, spoke in a voice that trembled with something that might have been shame. We told you that you were too young and too primitive to understand the universe. We dismissed your questions and patronized your scientists, and never considered that you might see something we had missed. Chun shook her head. You taught us everything we know. Your technologies made our victory possible. Kovani shields and Celestin sensors and Threnix engines. We could never have defeated the swarm without the knowledge you shared with us. But we did not believe the swarm could be defeated, Yeltra said quietly. We had given up hope, and you never did. No, Chen agreed. We never did. Because humans do not know how to give up. It is not in our nature. We will fight and struggle and rage against the darkness until our very last breath. And sometimes, that stubbornness is exactly what the universe needs. She picked up the data crystal and held it out toward the assembly. I am not here to gloat or to lecture you about what you should have done differently. I am here to give you a gift and to ask for one thing in return. Name it, General Kreth said immediately. Whatever you ask, the Valorian Empire will grant it. Similar words of agreement came from species throughout the chamber. A chorus of voices expressing gratitude in 100 different languages. Chan smiled. And for the first time since she had entered the chamber, she looked like the woman Yeltris remembered from years of diplomatic friendship. Never tell us that something is impossible again, she said simply. Never laugh when a young species asks questions about problems you have already decided cannot be solved. Never assume that just because you have given up, everyone else must give up too. She placed the crystal on the podium and stepped back, because you have no idea what we will do to prove you wrong. The assembly sat in stunned silence as Chun turned and walked toward the exit, her single aide rising to follow her this time. She did not run. She walked with the steady dignity of someone who had faced extinction and won. Someone who had carried the weight of galactic salvation on her shoulders and was finally allowed to put it down behind her. 847 species watched her go, and they all felt something they had not felt in a very long time. They felt hope, and they felt the first stirrings of a new understanding about the strange. Stubborn, impossibly determined. Creatures called humans. They were not the primitives the galaxy had believed them to be. They were something far more powerful. They were survivors, and they had just saved everyone in the years that followed. The Galactic Assembly changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Learning from humanity's example that hope was not a weakness and that refusing to accept defeat was not naive, and humanity, for their part, never stopped reaching for the stars. Never stopped asking questions. Never stopped believing that tomorrow could be better than today, because that was what humans did. That was who they were, and the galaxy was better for having them in it.